Constitution talks about the existence of the Senate and the House of Representatives with a mandate that their leadership would come from amongst themselves. They would have to decide who their leaders would be. But since after the elections, we've seen speculations here or racing here and there for the leadership positions in the 10th National Assembly. Beyond those that will emerge as the leaders, what are the tasks ahead of these leaders? Are these tasks even being considered in the desire to lead the 10th National Assembly? Well, these are some of the questions we'll be asking today. And in the studio is Mr. Clement Nwankwo, Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nata.
So the elections have come and gone. I mean, howbeit there are contestations in the courts, but we've seen a lot of conversations around who's going to lead the 10th National Assembly for whatever reason. I am hoping, and a lot of Nigerians will be hoping, is to see a National Assembly that will carry out its three primary functions: lawmaking, oversight, and effective representation well. Let's see. Just give us your perspective on these race for those leadership positions before we get into what they should be looking at.
Well, I wish there wasn't a race. Parliamentary democracies or legislative democracies develop and practices get well established in some of the climes from which we received our representative democracy as we do today. And in those advanced democracies, you don't have this constant seasonal squabbles for leadership. And we've seen recently the U.S. elections that happened in the fall of last year.
Are you sure there are not those things, those conversations or contests are not there? Is it not possible, possibly because they are not in the public space?
Let me arrive. Okay. You do have those places, and Nancy Pelosi, in her 80s, was Speaker of the U.S. Congress when the Democrats were in the majority. And not being in the majority, she was also the leader of the opposition, so to say. And when you did have that the Democrats lost their majority and the Republicans took over, there was a question of voting for whom the Republicans have decided is their leader, McCarthy. There were almost 6 votes to get McCarthy elected. And it wasn't a vote or contestation between him and anybody else. It was simply to get everyone to get the buy-in to support him. And I think that we need to come to that point in this country where we don't have this constant seasonal squabble, because it destroys our democracy. The quality then of the leadership becomes a major problem. But you're right in your introduction. The leadership or the leadership of the National Assembly, each of the chambers, should necessarily emerge from election by the members themselves and not from interference from anybody else. It is from amongst the members that they can tell years ahead who would be their leader. If you noticed with the Republicans, Trump wasn't necessarily satisfied with McCarthy, and he is the leader of the Republican Party as we speak. But he wasn't necessarily satisfied, but he didn't and had really no powers to stop McCarthy or even dictate who would be the leader of the Republicans in the U.S. Congress. So we must come to a point in this country where leadership is established by agreement amongst all of the members, because they're all peers, they're equals. What we have seen, of course, is that when somebody emerges as Speaker, President of the Senate, in some ways they become overlords, and membership becomes subservient to this person simply because too much powers are given to presiding officers, powers to appoint committee chairmen, membership of committee, favors, privileges, and so on. this shouldn't be the case. If you notice as well, who becomes a committee chairman in established democracies has long been laid out. So when you do have, for instance, the chairman of a committee when a particular party is in the majority, their role reverses when they lose the majority and they become like shadow chairmen.
Okay.
So who was chairman Foreign Relations Committee in the US Congress when the Democrats were in the majority immediately reverses that the person who was in the Republican Party prior to the elections in November last year now goes back into being the shadow Foreign Relations Committee chairman. And that's the way it works everywhere. So in some ways, I think we need to come away from where we are. And that's where we are, using those words, simply because there's too much privileges, too much arbitrary powers in the hands of presiding officers, in the hands of even committee chairmen against members of the committee. So my hope is that at the end of this contestation, because you can't stop what has been let out of the bottle right now, we must begin to develop some practice that makes it possible for us to determine and know well ahead who a presiding officer would be. And
they do have their rule books, and they will tell you that they have rule books by which they operate amongst themselves, which is also the rule books are guided by the Constitution. So they are within the ambit of the law to carry on their functions, or to carry on putting themselves together to do the task for which they were elected. But let's step back a bit and look at what exactly do you think? I don't see where people who are going to serve, who really want to serve, are fighting themselves to serve. For instance, they say, who's going to sweep the house? I don't see the children fighting. I'll be the one to sweep. No, most times you see that when there's something to gain. So let's look at it. What should the 10th National Assembly be really looking at as they prepare to come into office? I mean, they've started their inductions, and I know a lot of them will be watching us right now, but what should they be thinking about, individually and collectively? What should they be looking at as they come in to serve the Nigerians?
I think it's really to fully exercise the powers of the legislature as entrenched in the Constitution, and those powers are enormous. If you notice, I think it was a couple of years ago under President Jonathan, the head of an agency, and I would mention that specifically, the Securities and Exchange Commission, was sanctioned by the National Assembly, by the House of Representatives, and that sanction included the National Assembly exercising its powers of withdrawing budgetary allocation to that commission. But the system worked in a way that that particular commission was able to function using or being given monies by a different agency. This shouldn't be the case. The powers of the National Assembly to give or allocate zero budget to an agency or commission should be such that it helps to enforce accountability and the powers of oversight of the National Assembly. So I think that the National Assembly needs to get to the point where it is able to exercise its powers and sanction an agency of government that violates that exercise of its power. The problem is when you do have members elect a presiding officer or leadership that hasn't been chosen from amongst themselves, but have been dictated to them. And that, I think, is what you see with the reaction. Certainly, the party with a majority should have the constitutional powers to be given the privilege of electing its own presiding officer for the National Assembly, and as well leadership of the committees. What we should see is that that leadership that emerges does not become subservient to the executive. And, we listened to the outgoing president of the Senate talking a few days ago, responding to criticisms of the National Assembly being rubber stamp. I think people say that when they see that there are things that the National Assembly should do that they don't do. And the executive comes up making requests for loans, and you simply say, yes, carry go. The executive nominates persons to positions. You don't ask questions. And that's why you had what you had with Adamawa State, where a resident electoral commissioner went rogue. And that's why you have so many resident electoral commissioners who are party members being appointed. National Assembly didn't do its job. And that's part of what influenced the outcome of the elections, that you appoint partisan elements into the Electoral Commission. So you should have a situation where the National Assembly exercises its powers without necessary recourse to the executive. You did see a situation where the executive recently had spent money running into trillions of naira and goes to the National Assembly to approve after the fact. You are seeing a situation as the government has a few days to leave office. It's asking the National Assembly to approve $800 million loan from the World Bank. The government is taking decisions, the executive is taking decisions that the National Assembly is not responding to.
I would ask you this question, but I'll put it out there so that you're thinking about it, even though my colleagues are coming. How the citizens who are being represented by these legislators should have or should be reacting when it comes to this matter of a rubber-stamped National Assembly. It also means that the citizens are not doing their bit. But let's get to Lagos. My colleagues have questions for you. Ayo, Buki.
Well, thank you, Nyota. A quick question on that one, Mr. Wankwo, and it raises a lot of questions when you talk about the fund. We'll come to the executive angle that you mentioned a little bit earlier. The fact that you said the National Assembly didn't do its job is a very, very concerning one. But it also brings to mind the Director General of the NILS, that's the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, saying, and I quote, "Legislative aides have been reduced to performing non-specialized and sometimes debasing jobs, such as holding the bags of members and picking phone calls. Some have described legislative aides as thugs for politicians. This is an erroneous conception of aides, which, according to him, are supposed they have experience in legislative duties and they could actually help the legislators to do a good job. But here we are now, irrespective of whatever agenda we set for the lawmakers, without the experience from their legislative aides, I don't know if they'll be able to do anything." So what would you say about that relationship between the legislators and their aides over the years in the performance of the jobs of the legislators?
Thank you, Ayo. I think that part of what you learn from being an experienced legislator is that your tenure as a legislator becomes meaningful by the quality of legislative duties that you perform. No legislator has exclusive knowledge of all of the issues, and that's where you have the requirement or the provision for them to appoint aides, and some of them have those powers to appoint as much as 5 legislative aides, some 7 legislative aides, depending on which arm of the National Assembly that you are elected into. The National Assembly Service Commission, which hires these aides as recommended by the members, sets out criteria and qualification for these aides. And you would notice, and it's not all legislators, there are legislators who are excellent in choosing their aides and who decide the nature of apportionment of responsibilities to those aides. Of course, those legislators who are serious, who make those conscious decisions about the quality of aides tend to deliver much better. They go into the National Assembly, they have a vision, they have a mission, they have the aides, but beyond the aides, they also know that they can tap into resources available from several support groups working with the National Assembly. For us in PLAC, we do provide some of those support as well, and we do have very, very good legislators who take advantage of this. We also know that the National Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies provides training when these aides are hired. And of course, the nature of training or reception of that training depends on who has been hired. But I know Niels, the DG of Niels, was saying what he was saying from the perspective of the fact that Niels exists to train qualified staff, because if you hire an unqualified staff, then it doesn't matter the nature and extent of training. Some would find it difficult to learn in a field where they basically don't have the basic knowledge to be able to do as much as they should. So at the end of the day, it boils down to the individual legislators. Some want to contribute greatly to the National Assembly and actually do so. Some decide that it's a period to compensate persons who had worked for them and worked for their elections, and so they are not so concerned about the quality of those they have hired. And that always impacts on the nature and quality of delivery of their responsive legislative responsibilities.
Which raises the issue, Mr. Wako, because you just said, you began by saying that the NILS, or the National Assembly Service Commission, sets the criteria for the quality of, or the qualifications, so to speak, of the legislative aides that would be hired. Could you give us an idea of the minimum qualifications, so to speak, of the people that have or need to be hired by the legislators in order to be able to do a fair enough job? There are those who say some of them are civil servants of grade levels between 10 and 16 or thereabout, but can you give us an inkling into that? Perhaps that will help Nigerians understand why we have either the quality of laws or none of it over the years that we've had.
I think that, of course, you do have a university degree or college degree that is always underlined there. But, you know, when you look at what's going on in channels, in the Sunrise program, the quality and the excellent job that you are doing isn't necessarily dictated by the fact that you all have a college degree or university degree. It's basically that even when people have the basic qualification of a university degree, they should have the abilities to deliver on the responsibilities that you have entrusted on them. So it's not just the paper qualification. And you did see that begin to happen, again, going back to the US Congress, where because you have had persons trained, not necessarily that they've come with a university degree. The U.S. Congress, I think there were a couple of legislators who questioned the qualification about college degree and focused and decided, I think a representative in the Congress recently decided that she wasn't going to hire someone with a university degree, but she was going to hire someone who has great knowledge, great experience with legislative responsibilities. So it's not just so much a university degree. In our climb, in our environment, that becomes important if you want to deliver really well. But you must also look at those who can help you. And we do have people who have come over time. Legislative aides, PLAC, for instance, deploys in consultation with the National Assembly interns on a regular basis. Those interns have acquired knowledge of the workings and functionings of the National Assembly, and they would be very well placed to assist legislators to get a full good grip of what is going on in the National Assembly, especially for new members of the National Assembly. But for old members of the National Assembly or returning members, certainly they do understand the implications of the responsibility of being a legislator. And it goes again to the question that in Nigeria, you don't have a lot of returning members. In this election, we had, 70% attrition rate, so only just about 34 former members are coming back to the 10th Assembly, which should not be the case. It should be that you have members who have established themselves, who have shown the quality of their work, being returned on a regular basis. That way you would have institutional memory. You would not have novices coming into the National Assembly because, quite frankly, they would spend the first half of it learning how the National Assembly works, learning where the corridors are, and so on.
Just a second, Mr. Wako. Do you see that as a problem? I mean, 70% of new lawmakers is what you're talking about now. Do you see that as a potential problem, particularly because, as you say, they don't have that much experience and they literally have to learn from the people that you say you're training? Do you see that as a problem, in the potential problem in this 10th Assembly?
I think it could be a problem, yes, if you have novices coming in who have a lot to learn. And I think, yes, sometimes people say, oh, some legislators don't deserve to come back anyway. But the reality is, if you have new members turning in all the time, the legislature is going to keep being weak. It's going to keep being a tool manipulated by the executive who understand the human mind and how they can be manipulated. So I think it's a problem that this country has such huge turnovers. And I must again go back to the question that the political parties, that's where we should go back to, need to be able to set up a system that enables the best to show up and be elected. The idea that people have to squabble with the political parties to get nominations, sometimes pay bribes to leadership of political parties to emerge as candidates and spend so much money to delegates to be able to emerge, is a weakening indicator respecting the choice of the best candidates for elections. Again, beyond the fact that you have a 70% attrition rate, you also have the fact that in the House of Representatives and the Senate, the number of women who are in the National Assembly are being decimated on a regular basis. I think that for a country with such large representation in the legislature, it is deeply, deeply worrying that you do have only very, very few women being elected. In fact, an embarrassingly low number of women being elected into the legislature. These are concerns that political parties need to take into account, deciding that you must have the quality of representation that is needed such that the best comes out as candidates from your party, but also that you give a space for women to participate in decision making. For me, I think it's sad where we are with the level and extent of women representation. It is embarrassing.
Indeed, Mr. Nwankwo, and we hope that in the 10th Assembly, the conversation on the gender bills will be reopened. But you also make a very, very important point about, the weakness of the Assembly when we continually have new members. And we have a sizable number of new members elected in this 10th Assembly for the upper and the lower chamber. I wonder if you see that as a problem that may affect their ability to wield their block vote in order to ensure the election of a leader that will uphold the all-important independence of the National Assembly. I wonder if you see that, as a problem.
It is a problem. First to say that, yes, it is important that, going back to the point you make, that it is important that we do have a playing field that allows the emergence of more women, because the whole question around, and again, when I talk about when there's a conversation going on about the gender bills, I think that there is only really one major bill affecting the female gender in the National Assembly, and that's the bill to increase by constitutional alteration the nature and level of representation of women by creating additional seats. I think if I was a legislator, a female legislator, that would be a major pursuit within 10th National Assembly. We must, by constitution, create additional seats for women. Once we can do this, you will find that there will even be much more increased representation of women, because the women will be encouraged to vie for the seats that they are competing with men for. Secondly, I think that, yes, there is, like you said, the concern about the new members coming in. I think that when you do have new members, they tend to be impressionable, and that's why you have seen the new members being the harvesting field for votes for those who are aspiring for leadership or presiding officer positions in the National Assembly. If you did have returning members, these issues would be well agreed even before elections happen, that this is where or who our leader is, and it would just be really a matter of routine that who becomes Speaker, who becomes President of the Senate is decided well ahead of the inauguration of a new session of the National Assembly.
So amid all of these contestations, you know, especially from the aspirants in the race, do you see any one of them, you know, that is best suited to uphold the independence of the National Assembly that you talk about? Do you see any one of them, or will this concept of party supremacy, will it, trump even their contestations amid as we prepare ourselves for the elections?
It'll be difficult for me to speak about any particular one, but I know that the most effective, most respected presiding officers are those chosen by the members themselves. They would have security of tenure because the members have made that decision. And we did see the example of I think it was the inaugurating session that led us into the Fourth Republic in 1999, where in the House of Representatives you did see two speakers in that session. In the Senate, you did see 4 presidents of Senate in that session. A lot of what that was happening because the executive was deciding on who would lead the legislature or not. But you would see in subsequent years where the National Assembly emerged from amongst the members electing themselves. And you did see in the Senate, of course, David Mack being one of the longest reigning presidents of Senate. You did see the stability of tenure that happened when Governor Tambuwal was Speaker. Speaker Yakubu Dogara was Speaker. There was that security of tenure of those presiding officers. But I worry that if you do have a situation where the executive tries to dictate, even if it muzzles through in getting their nominees, and I don't know why they should be nominating anyway, but in putting forward a candidate, that candidate may suffer from the issues of security of tenure. So the most effective ones would be really those who the members of National Assembly have elected from amongst themselves. Okay,
Mr. Nwankwo, we have to go. We've talked about the National Assembly, and that thought I planted earlier about the role of the citizens. Now, 3 functions of the National Assembly: lawmaking, representation, oversight, right? But in representing the people, what should the citizens be doing as this 10th Assembly prepares to come in?
I think the citizens need to be focused on what is the expectations they have of members of the National Assembly. Let's not forget the National Assembly does not perform executive functions, and that's something that we need to build this democracy to help the members to better deliver. The expectation that you have that members of the National Assembly will pay your personal costs, attend funerals, attend birthday parties, and so on. For me, that's what worries me about even thinking about going into the National Assembly. I wouldn't be able to function in that way. My role as a legislator would be, how do we get the best laws? How do we review existing laws? How do we hold the executive to account? How do we ask our people the question to get things done in the way that should help them? I worry, for instance, about the whole concept of constituency projects. the executive has and the legislature have not been able to work out the best ways to deliver on constituency projects. And I know that this is a long conversation, but the idea, the idea that you would have a legislator wants to do road in his constituency and have that project put into an agency of government that has absolutely nothing to do with building roads, and you have the executive allow that to happen. That, for me, I think is troubling.
All right. Thank you. I'm sure this is a conversation we will still come back to, but thank you so much, Mr. Clement Nwankwo, Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC. Thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
All right. Sunrise Daily will be back in a moment. We're still staying with the legislature, but from another angle. Don't go away.